Hi, I'm Adam Summer. You're listening to the Yerushalmi Talk podcast with the support of the Yeshivat Devar Yerushalayim in Har Nof, Jerusalem. This is Kilayim, Chapter 2, Halacha 3. This is part 2 of this year, and today we're getting into fenugreek. Fenugreek is something that people still eat today. It's chilba, basically. And there's two things that people want for it. One is going to be the seed. That is going to be edible. That's going to be what you're making your hilba out of. And the other thing is going to be the stalk. Fenugreek is going to be unique in the halacha because one of the implied laws from Joshua, when Joshua came into the land, when the Jews inherited the land of Israel, he gave over 10 laws. And one of those is going to be that if you have grass that comes in a field, that you can pick the grass and use it for your animals, even if the grass is on someone else's land. But fenugreek is going to be special because there's twofold ways that you want for fenugreek. If you're growing it for one of the uses, you're going to want the grasses there because it's beneficial for the growth. And if you're going to be using it for the other use, you don't want to be having the grasses because it's not good for the use. And so over here, let's say you're trying to grow the fenugreek and you want the grasses there. Well, maybe it's going to be Kilayim. And the other issue is going to be worrying that, if they really want the grass there, then if somebody comes along and takes the grass, well, then you're damaging their crop. And so what if they're going to have less than 1/24th that's going to be there? Then, as we covered, 1/24th of the grasses next to the fenugreek is not going to be Kilayim, just under 1/24th. So if somebody comes onto your field and comes and gathers the grass, you're really stealing because you desire to have that grass there to improve your fenugreek growth. So there's a lot going on here with Kilayim because in some cases you might actually have Kilayim here. Some cases you might have theft. So the case is going to be when Joshua is coming and saying, okay, there's these 10 rules when you come into the land and grass growing in a field, you can go and you can collect the grass, for your donkey or your horse, for animal food. It's not stealing. But what about for the field of fenugreek? Is that going to be an exclusion from what Joshua was talking about? That's what we're going to be getting into today. And that's why the Mishnah comes along and singles out fenugreek, because, again, it has this twofold use. In one of the cases, the grasses are going to be harmful to the growth of the fenugreek, and you don't want them. In the other case, it's going to be beneficial to the growth of the fenugreek, depending on what you're using it for. And then, you have now here like this foreign growth within this field that's going to be desirable. That's going to be a Kilayim issue. So the Gemara starts off and it says that these are the conditions of Joshua, that they may gather grasses for animal food in any place, even in someone else's field, no matter what is being grown in the field, except for a field of fenugreek. So Rosh Aurelio says that grasses are beneficial to the growth of the fenugreek, and Joshua therefore did not permit others to enter the fenugreek field to collect the grasses for their animals. Now, since grasses bring no benefit to a cultivated crop ordinarily, the owner generally allows other people to enter the field and pick the grasses for themselves. In other words, you're helping out the farmer by weeding his field. And if you walk in the Jerusalem area, like I walk in Har Nof to the yeshiva or the kollel to go learn, well, I see that they have wild grasses all over the place, even in areas without trees. Now, these grasses are going to be different varieties, but they're all there. And so if I were trying to grow a field and I had these grasses growing in my field, sure, I would be happy for somebody to come and pick it because you're helping me de-weed my field. But the idea is that if you're going into somebody else's field to pick these grasses, it's not going to be considered theft. Obviously, if you were going in to pick the guy's crop, that's going to be considered theft. But helping the guy to get rid of something that he does not want in there, like these grasses and weeds, that's not going to be considered theft. Now, this is actually going to be to have an orderly and a happy settlement of Eretz Yisrael. And Joshua is going to permit collecting the grasses for the sake of feeding your animals. Now, plants that are suitable for human consumption are not going to be allowed to be picked. These are, again, going to be grasses that are only going to be used as animal food. So, the types of things that donkeys are going to be happy with, but certainly something that a human can't use. Now, in addition, permission was given only in the case of grasses that grow on their own. And if the owner of the field purposefully planted grass for animal food, then these grasses may not be taken by others. So let's say you have a couple of fields and you have some cattle or you have some horses or donkeys and you're growing a field of animal food, of these grasses. You're actually trying to grow it. Well, you can't go onto his field because that's a valued crop. We're only talking about a case where the crop is not desirable and you're actually doing something that's going to be cooperative, where you're helping the other guy's field. So the idea is that this gemara is qualifying the prohibition to gather grasses from another's field of fenugreek. And how would this work? So Rabbi Yaakov Bar Acha says in the name of Rabbi Yitzhak Bar Nachman that the limitation of the Brisa applies when one has sown the fenugreek for the stalks. Now, in that case, the grass is going to be beneficial. If you're growing it for the stalks, like for animal food, the grass is going to be beneficial for making that. Now, in this case, the grass is going to help this stalk to grow and to get better and for the stalk to become better quality. So that's desirable. Now, if the owner intends to eat the stalks of the fenugreek, then the foreign grasses are going to benefit the growth of the fenugreek, and the grass is going to provide a support like the trellis of a vineyard, and that's going to allow the fenugreek plant to expand and grow along this like trellis. So if, however, the owner is interested in the seed of the fenugreek, then it's going to be preferable that there's no foreign grasses in the field. And the grasses are going to end up sapping the strength of the fenugreek seeds so that no seeds will sprout well when they're sown. And by the same token, if one is planning to eat the seeds of the fenugreek, the grasses have an adverse taste on the seeds. So it might be where, in one way, if you're wanting to grow it for animal food, you want the grass to be there because it's going to help it to grow and it's going to give it something to climb against. And if you're growing it for the seed, if you're having the grasses there, it saps the plant's strength and the taste of the seed is no good. So when you're going to make your hilba out of these seeds, the taste won't be very good. It'll be very low quality. So in one way, you want the grass, and in one way, you don't want the grass. The question is going to be, in one of these cases, you could end up with Kilayim. Why? Because the grass is going to be considered a foreign species that's growing there in your field that you desire to have. And that's going to be the issue. Now, this is talking about a general term for bundles of stalks. And in this case, we're talking about the fenugreek intending to be harvested and piled together either for animal food, or you're going to try to eat the fenugreek, and you're trying to gather this together so that you can get the seeds out of it and go and eat it. So in the first approach, we see that one does not need to immediately remove grasses from a field of fenugreek because the owner is going to remove the detrimental growth on his own. And the second idea that's going to be coming up is that the damaging grasses don't need to be removed at all from one's field because of the owner's disinterest in the foreign species. And he's not considered to be maintaining Kilayim in his field. And that's going to be the same reason for why he will not be suspected of illegally planting Kilayim. So there's a lot of implications about this. And, the question is, leaving the grasses, depending on, if you want the grasses there to improve the stalks, then, this fenugreek is sown for the stalks, not for the seed. And in that case, then, if you have the grasses that are going to be there, then, you kind of want the grasses there. So the Gemara is going to talk about this more, and it's going to say that grasses are sometimes beneficial to the fenugreek, and it says, but we've taught in the Mishnah, and similarly in a case of fenugreek that gives rise to a variety of grasses, we do not obligate him to weed out the foreign species. Why? Because the grasses are damaging to the fenugreek. And we basically, it looks like, again, this is like two-part plant. In one case, depending on how you're growing it, the grasses are going to be beneficial to the plant, and where you're gonna not obligate them to weed it out. You're basically saying that doesn't want these foreign plants in there because it ruins his seed. So it doesn't give the appearance of him, you're damaging your own crop. And so at this point, the Gemara is understanding this Mishnah is permitting leaving the grass there, even when the fenugreek is sown for the stalks. Now, that's going to be a dissent because, we see that the grasses are damaging to the fenugreek when they're grown for the seed, and it throws off the flavor of that food. Is it going to be a case where, sometimes the grasses are beneficial and sometimes the grasses are not beneficial? So again, don't worry, this is going to all tie together because again, this is going to tie into Kilayim and theft, and under what conditions are you going to allowed to plant a field where you kind of want this other thing to help your plant to grow. Now this is going to have other applications as well. Now the Gemara is going to answer this question about what this Mishnah means, and Rabbi Yaakov Bar Acha says on his own that our Mishnah deals with a case where he raised the fenugreek for the seed. Now, that's going to be a case where, as I was saying, the grass is going to be detrimental to the fenugreek crop. And the Mishnah is therefore saying that we don't require him to uproot the grass in this case. But what Rabbi Yaakov Bar Acha is pointing out is that when the fenugreek is being grown for the stalks, then the grasses are beneficial to the fenugreek, and you would be required to weed out the grasses because now you're basically having two desired things within the same plot of land. You're not allowed to do that. That's going to be a Kilayim problem. So it looks like that the Baraisa that states that Joshua did not permit gathering of grasses from a field of fenugreek, which we're explaining as referring to fenugreek sown for the stalks, is dealing with fenugreek where there is going to be a Kilayim prohibition. So the Gemara is going to get into this, and Rabbi Yossi, the Amara, says, did Yoshua specify the restriction of taking grasses growing in a field of fenugreek only for the sake of protecting transgressors who maintain foreign grasses while they're subject to the Kilayim prohibition? So basically, is this rule by Joshua going to always be the case, even if what Rabbi Yossi is asking, even if somebody's pretending, he really wants the stalks and he's going to be pretending like he's growing it for seeds and leave it alone. That's what we're worried about. So basically, somebody who's dishonest about it, is that also going to be for him as well? That it's always going to be the case where this is going to be excluded. So according to this resolution, the Gemara says when the owner commits a sin, that's going to be when he maintains the grasses that are beneficial to him and they constitute Kilayim. And then the grasses are going to be forbidden to be taken under the laws of theft. Whereas if he did not commit a sin, when he maintains the grasses that are detrimental to him and do not constitute Kilayim, then the grasses are permitted to be taken under the laws of theft. That's the question. So the Vilna Goan is going to explain this like this. Joshua made a general decree permitting the gathering of grasses from other people's fields. But there's an exception to that. That's going to be the field of fenugreek. And according to Rabbi Yaakov Bar Acha, even this exception is not for all cases of fenugreek, but only for the specific case of fenugreek sown for the stalks, only for the stalks. And that's going to be because in this case, the grasses are beneficial to the crop. However, because they are beneficial to the crop, maintaining the grasses within this field is going to constitute Kilayim because you have a mixture of different kinds of desired seeds and growth within the same area. So this specification then, which protects the beneficial grasses in such a field of being gathered by others, benefits only those who are interested in maintaining prohibited Kilayim in the field. So Joshua, says the Vilna Goan, would not have added a special qualifying clause for the mere sake of wrongdoers. Now, the Yerushalmi is going to make a distinction that the Bavli is not going to do. The Bavli is going to make a distinction between two types of Fenugreek fields. The Tosafot over in Baba Kama 81a is going to be asking about, a similar case to this Gemara, and it's going to be explaining that this Baraisa could be speaking about a case where the ratio of foreign grasses is less than 1/24th to limit for Kilayim. So, in such a case, it's possible to maintain even beneficial grasses in the field, and Joshua, in that case, would be forbidding gathering these grasses as well in a Fenugreek field. But in this Mishnah, it's dealing with detrimental grasses that don't require the grasses to be removed, even when they're going to exceed the 1/24th limit. So the Yerushalmi does not accept the Bavli's answer, and the case of the Bavli is going to be saying that, look, you have these beneficial grasses, but it's going to be less than 1/24th the limit. And I think the Yerushalmi is making a broader distinction, saying that, well, we have a lot of these grasses, and it's not just nullified in less than 1/24th. And the question is, in general, what's the status of these grasses? Whereas the Bavli is going to be looking at it and saying the permitted way, where it's like, look, you have, say, like 2 or 3% of these foreign grasses there, and if somebody went onto that field to take the 2 or 3% grass, according to the Bavli, you'd be saying that would be prohibited under the laws of theft. Now, the Yerushalmi is basically going to be saying that, well, what if you have this, field that has grasses in there? Isn't that just going to be Kilayim? And by the way, if somebody were going to remove the grasses, certainly if it's over, 4.16%, which is going to be 1/24th, then in that case, then basically you're not going to be guilty for the law of theft. You're just removing Kilayim from someone else's field. The Yerushalmi, not the question, but the Yerushalmi is rejecting this distinction between two types of Fenugreek fields. And the Bavli is going to be holding that there are two kinds. Rabbi Yossi is basically asking a question if, in certain cases, this can be a case of theft. And Rabbi Yossi is concluding and saying that it must be that there's, in fact, no difference between the two cases regarding Joshua's exclusion. Rather, it's the same law for one who sowed the fenugreek for the seed, and the same law for someone who sowed it for the stalks. So it looks like Joshua, according to Rabbi Yossi, this is going to be rejected, but according to Rabbi Yossi, Joshua is prohibiting gathering grasses from all fields of fenugreek, even those planted for the seed, which are damaging to the grasses, and are thus going to be excluded from the Kilayim prohibition. And this restriction is going to benefit both the wrongdoers and the righteous. So the Gemara is going to proceed to explain why Joshua prohibited taking these damaging grasses that are going to be ruining the crops. Why would you be allowed to do that? And the Gemara says that the fact that one may not gather grasses from any field of fenugreek implies that the owner wishes to keep these grasses in all cases. So the Gemara is going to be questioning what the Gemara means. And the Gemara says that, but we learned in the Mishnah, and similarly in the case of fenugreek that gave rise to a variety of grasses, that we do not obligate him to weed out the foreign species. And the Gemara says, if, however, you say that in all the cases the owner's mind is set upon benefiting from the grasses, then the rabbis should obligate him to weed out the grasses from among the fenugreek because of the prohibition of Kilayim. So Rosh Aurelio says, since he's interested in keeping these grasses, allowing them to remain in the field is going to be considered maintaining Kilayim. And therefore, we should require him to take it out because it looks like he has Kilayim there. So the Gemara is going to continue and answer. And I'm going to pick up the baby so he cries less. Aaron Udalev, my son, who's 9 months, is listening to Masechet Kilayim. Baruch Hashem. So the Gemara is going to answer, and Rabbi Acha says in the name of Rabbi Messiah that he is interested in them, but only as if they were uprooted and left lying before him in the field. In other words, what if you've taken the stalks and you've laid it next to this field? So although the owner does not want the grasses to continue growing alongside the fenugreek, he nevertheless wishes to keep the grasses that have already grown. And since there's going to be, on one hand, no violation of Kilayim, since the owner does not want the grasses growing next to his fenugreek, yet on the other hand, others may not take them for themselves, since the owner wishes to benefit from them after they're uprooted. So in other words, that the owner himself wants the food for the donkey. And this Gemara's answer is going to be difficult to understand. And it's hard to understand because if the reason Joshua permitted others from removing grasses from the fenugreek field, and that's not going to be because of the benefit that they have for the cultivated crop, but because the owner wishes to use them to feed his own animals later on, so why would this same logic not apply to all grasses coming from any kind of field? Now, that's a big question. So in the case of fenugreek, where the owner knows that he must go through the trouble of weeding out the grasses to keep them for himself, then why have this law like this, and why not just have it? You can have it like a wheat field and let him take out the grasses later from the wheat field if he wants to feed it to his own animals. What's the distinction? And this Gemara is going to get challenged, obviously, because it's a hard question to understand. So this answer is going to get challenged. And the Gemara says, if so, if he found Kilayim in the vineyard, and that's going to be, foreign species is going to be found growing among your grapevines, the Gemara says they should likewise be forbidden under the laws of theft. For if he's interested in them as if they were uprooted and left lying before him in the vineyard, in other words, if he's interested in uprooting it and using it for his own benefit later, it should be allowed, right? But what this is pointing out is saying that, look, if you're having foreign seed here at all in a vineyard, that's going to be problematic. And so even if you're saying, well, I want to use it later for animal feed, and I'll just uproot it later and use it for animal feed, well, that's still going to be forbidden under the laws of Kalei Akarim, which are going to be even more strict than Kalei Zerayim laws. So this obviously is not going to be allowed. And before it comes up and sorts out this challenge, the Gemara is going to cite an Amarah who's going to be expressing the same basic answer given in a slightly different way. Rabbi Yosef did not say the exact same explanation that the owner is interested in the attached grasses in the fenugreek field being uprooted and left before him. Rather, says the Gemara, he's saying that in the end, after these grasses are uprooted, the owner is interested in taking them as if they were uprooted and left lying before him. In other words, that it's going to be prohibited for others to take the grasses for themselves, because once the grasses are cut and the damage to the fenugreek no longer is going to be there, then the owner is interested in benefiting from the detached grasses for his own donkeys. Would that be a case of theft? Would that be a case of Kilayim? And the Gemara is going to challenge this. To say, if so, then even if he found Kilayim in the vineyard, they should also be forbidden under the laws of theft. In other words, if I have foreign grasses now growing in my vineyard, and I'm going to say, don't worry about it, I'm going to leave it for later until the grasses grow more, and then I'm going to cut the grasses, and I'm going to keep the grasses, and I'm going to use it for animal food. Effectively, what this is saying is they're saying that, if somebody came into my field and took my weeds in my vineyard, that's not going to be de-weeding it. That should be like theft, right? Because I want to keep these for, my donkeys later, these grasses. So, I have this intention to want to keep it. So why is it that it wouldn't be forbidden under the laws of theft? And the Gemara is going to be saying, in the end, after a foreign species is uprooted from a vineyard, he'd be interested in them as if they were uprooted and left lying before him. Basically, even if you have an interest in these grasses, okay, that's still not going to be theft in the case of somebody coming along into your vineyard to take out the weeds, right? That's going to be part of Joshua's 10 restrictions or allowances. And over here, you're actually making sure that the guy is not growing Kilayim, even if he has the intention to want the grasses there. Now, you wouldn't really want grasses growing in your vineyard because it's going to lower the nutrition in the soil. So you're interested in doing that. But now if you have a strange guy who doesn't mind having, grapes that are not as good and vines that are a little bit weaker so that he can get some grasses now to feed his donkey, he has this intention to keep the grasses later, and you come along into that field to go pick those grasses, did you commit theft or not? Well, that's what this is basically poking at, saying, no, you didn't commit theft, and you've actually stopped this from being Kilayim, and you've actually helped the guy. So the Gemara is going to answer that Kilayim is going to be different from Fenugreek, and here's how they're going to be different. So why, again, is going to be where the Fenugreek is going to be this exclusion, that you can go gather the grasses from all the fields except for the Fenugreek field. That is going to be the exclusion. But why? The Gemara says, here in the cases of grass growing in the Fenugreek field, he has with whom to bring them in. In other words, it's going to be worth his while to gather the grasses along with the Fenugreek. And so the Fenugreek is going to be used also for the animal food, and basically that's going to be saying that these grasses are going to be fed to animals together with the Fenugreek. So Rabbi Kanievsky is saying that even if we're dealing with Fenugreek being grown for human consumption, it's likely that some of it's going to be used for animal consumption as well, and therefore it's worth the owner's while to gather the uprooted grasses together with the Fenugreek. In other words, he's saying that, fine, you're going to make some hilba, that's fine, or maybe you're going to use some of the stalks, but some of these stalks and some of these seeds you're going to end up using to feed your animals, and if it's going to be partially animal feed anyway, then you can go ahead and feed the grasses with it. That's going to be the idea. So the Gemara is going to continue, is going to say, whereas here in the cases of the Kilayim, he does not have with whom to bring it in. In other words, it's not worth his while to gather these foreign species together with the grapes because they're not consumed together. These are going to be animal food products, and these are going to be human food products. And in the case of the Fenugreek, it's not going to be just human food. It can also be used for animal food. Now, the Gemara is going to ask a question. Rav Nachman says that Rabbi Manna questioned this and says, consider the following. If there was another field of Fenugreek next to a vineyard, and there were foreign species growing in the vineyard, would the law change? In other words, Gemara says, for he would then have with whom to bring it in. In other words, it'd be worth his while to gather in these foreign species in the vineyard and bring them in together with the Fenugreek. So in other words, basically this is saying, look, if I kept my grasses, I have two fields, right? I have one Fenugreek field and I have one vineyard. And I'm going to harvest my Fenugreek field with my grasses. I'm going to feed it to the animals, but I also want to keep some of the grasses growing in my vineyard. And I'm going to gather all of this together. I'm going to gather the Fenugreek and the grasses together. Is that going to be allowed? Because again, you're going to be valuing the grasses for the animal food. But now again, you're keeping the animal food, the grasses, for a benefit. So the Gemara is going to continue now with the position of the rabbis. The position of the rabbis is going to disagree with Rabbi Yossi's conclusion. Rabbi Yossi is basically saying that Yoshua prohibited taking grasses from any kind of Fenugreek field. And that's really, going to be the question. Well, what if you're, wanting to have some sort of benefit from the grasses for your Fenugreek because you want these stalks to grow nicer? Well, Rabbi Yossi is going to be saying that that's also going to be disallowed. You're not going to be able to go into that guy's field and take it for theft reasons. And then you say, well, wait a second. Does he himself want it for, feeding his own animals? And then basically you're saying, well, if that's the case that you want these grasses even for your own animals in your own field, then, well, you should be able to do that for any field. You should be able to say, well, I want these grasses here, and I'm going to grow my main crop, and then I'm going to take the animal food from it at the end and then feed it to the animals. Well, we know that that's going to be prohibited as Kilayim, and the Gemara says and dissents with Rabbi Yossi's view. The following statement by the rabbis disagrees with Rabbi Yossi's conclusion that Yoshua prohibited taking grasses from any kind of Fenugreek field. And the Gemara says, Rabbi Zerikon says in the name of the Academy of Rabbi Yanai, all aftergrowths that arise in a field are forbidden. In other words, they may not be taken by others except for those emerging in a fallow field. So that's basically saying that if you have a field that's uncultivated by the owner, since he wishes for the field to remain empty and he has no interest in isolated aftergrowths that sprout in a fallow field, there's no problem for somebody to come in and take it. Now, Joshua wanted to permit gathering grasses that emerge in somebody else's field, but what about other types of growths that are going to be more valuable than grasses? Is that going to be left for the owners? That's really what this is saying. So what if you were growing woad in a field? That's going to be used for dyes. You can use it for dyeing clothing. You can be using it for dyeing animals, to mark animals, like which one is going to be behemoth, which one's not, things like that. And you actually desire to have the woad. And now there's an aftergrowth in your field of some woad. Well, that woad is going to be more valuable than some grasses. Is that going to be permitted? Is that going to be disallowed? And what this is saying by Rabbi Yanai is that only from a fallow field can you go and take these aftergrowths, which are going to be more valuable than the grasses. The Gemara continues, says, but in a plowed field or in a vineyard, in these fields, it can be assumed that the owner is not interested in benefiting from the aftergrowths. And the Gemara says, some say that an additional exception should be added to the list, where it says, except for aftergrowths arising in a field of fenugreek grown for seed. Now, in this case as well, since the aftergrowth is going to be detrimental to the fenugreek, it should be allowed to be taken by others without receiving permission from the owner. And this now would be in conflict with Rabbi Yossi's view that Yoshua prohibited gathering grasses from any fenugreek field. So in a plowed field, the owner wants his field to be prepared for the upcoming sowing of the crop. And in a vineyard, the owner does not want foreign species there to prohibit his grapevines, but also because it saps the soil. And so therefore, he's happy when others come and take this damaging foreign growth from a field. The Gemara now returns to Rabbi Yossi's view. Rabbi Yossi is maintaining that Joshua enacted the prohibition against collecting grasses from any field of fenugreek, even one sown for seed, and here's how he's going to support his opinion. So again, what this is saying is, look, fenugreek has two uses, and it has two outcomes in terms of whether you want grasses there or not. If you're growing it for stalks, you want the grasses there, it helps it to grow. If you're growing it for seed so that you can make your hilba, well, you don't want the grasses there because it ruins the taste of the seed and it hinders the growth of the seed, so you're not going to get as much yield. So in the case that you do want the stalks, well, why should it be forbidden for somebody to come in and collect it, right? Or should it be forbidden? Is that going to be a case of theft because you actually do desire the fenugreek in some way? Rabbi Yossi is going to defend his statement. Rabbi Yossi says that a statement of Rabbi Yochanan supports my view, and the case was as follows. It says there was an incident concerning a certain person who bought the produce of a vegetable from a non-Jew, from the garden of a non-Jew, and since he found there a mixture of diverse species which are going to be Kilayim, he came back to Rabbi Yochanan and asked how to deal with the vegetables. And Rabbi Yochanan told him, go out and pick the vegetables immediately and sell them according to the current price at the market. So Rabbi Yochanan's answer that he may not continue to maintain the diverse species in the garden because it's going to be Kilayim. And if he tarries in removing them from the garden by, say, waiting for the price to increase or until they fully mature, then, says the Vilna Goan, he will have transgressed the prohibition of maintaining Kilayim, as the Vilna Gaon's insight on this Gemara by Rabbi Yochanan. So he must therefore pick them immediately, basically, says the Vilna Gaon. And although this will force him to sell at the current market that might, by the way, be less expensive than what he could get later, he has to do it right away. And Rabbi Yochanan is basically telling him that he may sell according to the market price now, and he's not in violation of the Kilayim because it was planted by a non-Jew, and the profit that he's going to make by selling the vegetables as they are sold in the market, and had he planted the Kilayim himself, he would have violated a biblical prohibition and be penalized and not be allowed to sell the vegetables except to cover his own expenses. So Rabbi Yochanan is going to be challenged on this, and Rabbi Bahu says before Rabbi Yochanan, were we not taught in our Mishnah, this Mishnah, and similarly a place of threshing floors in which there are many kinds of vegetation, we do not obligate him to weed out the foreign species. So apparently, Rabbi Abahu is saying that a person is not obligated to remove diverse species that are grown in their own on the field. And here too, since the Jew did not plant the vegetables in the garden, why is he obligated to uproot them? And Rabbi Yochanan explains this to him, and he responds. Rabbi Yochanan replied, the case of this mission is different because the location of the emerging plants indicates that the owner is not interested in them. But in the present case that I just ruled on, there's no indication that the Jew is not interested in the diverse species growing in the vegetable garden. And so that's a case where they must be uprooted immediately. And now Rabbi Yossi completes his proof based on this ruling by Rabbi Yochanan. It says, but Rabbi Yochanan should have answered with another distinction. It says here, in the case that came before Rabbi Yochanan, it is forbidden under the laws of theft for others to take vegetables from the garden. Whereas here, in our case of the Mishnah, the diverse species growing in the threshing floor are permitted under the laws of theft, since the owner does not want them ruining his threshing floor. In other words, if you have multiple aftergrowths now growing from this threshing floor, that's not going to be theft if somebody comes along to take it. You're actually helping the guy out. It's going to ruin his threshing floor. The Gemara says, how can you challenge me regarding something that is forbidden under the laws of theft, where no one but the owner may remove him, by comparing it with something that's permissible under the laws of theft, and in which case we may rely on other people taking them out? So, since Rabbi Yochanan does not give this answer, it would seem that he's of the opinion that the Mishnah exempts detrimental foreign growth from the Kilayim prohibition, even in a case where it's forbidden for others to take the foreign growth. And in the case of a fenugreek seed that's being sown for seed, well, it would look like that would be an issue. So he gives this alternate answer. Now, Rabbi Yochanan's maintaining, like Rabbi Yossi, in the case of grasses that come from the Fenugreek field, according to Marafulda, that although the owner wants the grasses uprooted, nevertheless, he does not permit others to take them for themselves. And this mission is exempting the owner from removing the foreign grass, the foreign growths, and these foreign grasses, even in this case. And Rabbi Yochanan, therefore, could have simply answered that the leniency of our Mishnah is a result from the permission given to others to enter the field to remove Kilayim. And so he's basically giving other grounds now for this Mishnah's leniency, says the Marafulda. So what's going to be going on with this distinction that you get this different answer than what you would have expected? The Gemara rejects this and says one cannot prove from the fact that Rabbi Yochanan used one specific argument that he does not accept the other argument as well. The Gemara says, like that which Rabbi Imi says, that they, the sages, were rich in responses, and they had numerous relevant responses, but refrained from revealing them all. In other words, what this is saying is that there might be many reasons according to why the halacha is the way it is. And they don't necessarily give all the reasons for it. The Gemara says, or it may be compared to that which Rabbi Nasa said, that it is like a person who has two arguments and he responds to the other person's claim with only one of them. And here too, Rabbi Yochanan could have responded that the leniency of this Mishnah is because the foreign species may be gathered by everybody, but he preferred to provide another resolution. So the wording of this Gemara seems to imply that Rabbi Imi is saying that Rabbi Yochanan gave a different answer for why the person can come into the field and gather the grasses, and cannot do it in the field of a fenugreek plant. That they can't do it. So Rabbi Yochanan is maintaining, like Rabbi Yossi, that the case of grasses that emerge from the field of fenugreek is going to be where the owner wants the grasses uprooted, and nevertheless he does not permit others to take them for themselves. And basically, Rabbi Yochanan is saying that no one else is allowed to remove them, and the owner is therefore obligated to immediately cut down any Kilayim in his possession. So basically, he can't hold it as Kilayim, but also the other guy is not allowed to come and take it either. That's the novelty of what Rabbi Yochanan's point is. Why does this matter? Well, you can have plants that can have two purposes, and in one case, it might be where if you go in and collect it, it could be a problem under the law of theft. But if you don't do it, it could be a problem under Kilayim. And so this person's not allowed to have a foreign growth there in there because you're not allowed to maintain Kilayim either. But what about allowing other people to come in and collect it? Well, that's also going to be a case of theft. So have a great day. Why? Because basically you can get immediate use out of it. Let's say you just noticed the grasses came about, right? So I can feed my donkey with those grasses right now. I'm not allowed to maintain the Kilayim. I have to go do this now. That's Rabbi Yochanan's point. You have to go either get rid of the crop now or harvest the grasses now. If somebody comes into my field and takes out the grasses, well, he's basically going to be stealing in the case of the fenugreek plant, because the fenugreek is being helped by the grasses in this one case, but I'm not allowed to maintain it. And that's why he's basically saying you have to go and cut it down right away. Somebody else can't go gather it, and you can go and sell it right away. That's Rabbi Yochanan's point. Have a great day.